So Carl Jung, spirituality and time. Immense contrasts can be observed between Carl Jung's spiritual attitude toward time and views that dominate the secular, scientific and religious cultures of our society. Of course, many people are sympathetic to Jung's ideas, and yet his spiritual psychology remains marginal to prevailing social assumptions and values. Exploring these contrasts can help us to become more attentive to the deeper currents of our world, aiming to attune our thoughts to the voice of the earth. We usually think of human life as spanning a long time. By contrast, Jung takes as his starting points the archetypes of the collective unconscious, archetypes such as the hero, the wise old man, the mother, the Messiah, have evolved in human psychology over thousands of years, even over tens of thousands of years, as defining structures of the mind. Against this long horizon of deep time, our life is like the blink of an eye. The assumptions in ordinary thinking don't take such immensity into account. Our popular assumptions are largely confined to what we can readily understand and see. Jung asks us instead to set our beliefs and knowledge against the deeper frame of a mystical, symbolic cosmology, in a philosophy of connection and participation, while fully respecting scientific method within its domains. This approach challenges the assumptions of ordinary thinking, at least within scientific approaches. For example, we like to explain every event as a result of prior physical causes, but Jung insists that causality is far more complex, grounded in a spiritual understanding of the interconnectedness of everything. This view from Jung offers a non-supernatural interpretation of language about God. Every event for Jung shares in the universal character of the moment that it occurs, through the holistic process that Jung called synchronicity. It reflects the biblical principle from Paul's letter to the Colossians, that everything is connected in the love of God, while avoiding any sense that God is separate from nature. So this integration of God and nature is a theme in philosophy that Jung picks up, and where ordinary thinking sees religion in the language of a separate supernatural realm and imagines eternity in terms of heavenly afterlife, Jung integrates religion into the relationship between our psychology and the natural cosmos. And he sees the supernatural language of religion as immensely valuable, but seeks to interpret it solely through its symbolic and allegorical rather than literal meaning. Ordinary thinking tends to focus on practical calculation, achieving finite goals, the means to an end known as instrumental reasoning. By contrast, Jung calls us to see our well-being and our psychic healing through contemplation of a larger whole, open to the infinite and the eternal. Our ordinary calculative thinking sees the conscious ego as the totality of the self, whereas Jung places the ego in the deeper frame of the unconscious mind, recognizing both the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. Ordinary thinking is consumed by instincts of survival, security, and pleasure, whereas Jung examines the deep trauma of life. He asks, how can we understand reality in order to heal ourselves? Ordinary thinking assumes a linear progress, advancing from primitive to modern, whereas Jung holds that modern culture has lost much of value that can be learned from traditional, indigenous, and non-Western traditions. Ordinary thinking is limited to our personal concerns, where Jung calls us to transcend our own situation and think of the world as a whole. Ordinary thinking, in its more degraded forms, tends to regard only the present moment as real, whereas Jung observes that, to quote, "We are not of today or of yesterday, we are of an immense age." Our ancient enduring identities can be recovered and honoured to heal the fragmentation of our culture, integrating a rational spirituality with modern scientific knowledge and religious heritage as a platform for cultural renewal. These contrasts between Jung and what I've called ordinary thinking contain profound ethical messages. The conventional approaches of instrumental reasoning, means to an end, do retain immense value, of course, but also have much to learn from Jung's psychoanalytic critiques as a physician of the soul. Exploring Jung's approach to time and spirituality can help us to reveal how spiritual psychology offers insights that call us to change our assumptions, opening a dialectical conversation between linear and cyclic understandings of time. My own engagement with Jung began when I read my mother's copy of his memoir, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, as a teenager. The title, Memories, Dreams and Reflections, embeds a relationship to the past through our memories, a vision of the future in our dreams, and an engagement with the present moment in our reflections. Jung had a strong sense of the eternal as present within time. He said, "The present contains the past, and the future is pregnant in its present, in the present," in his book, Psychology and Religion. The important thing here, in terms of this different explanation of eternity, is to recognise that the past and the future are just as real as the present. Now, perhaps unconsciously, reading Jung led me on a journey into the systematic study of time. And I remember when I found the book Being and Time by Martin Heidegger in the university bookshop as an undergraduate. I read it with close attention and excitement. It's a notoriously difficult book, but I actually found it mostly quite clear, perhaps because I found its arguments helpful in providing coherent foundations for philosophy. Heidegger is different from Jung in using philosophy rather than psychology as his lens, but he does offer quite a similar broad research agenda, exploring the meaning of truth under the eye of eternity. This led me to my bachelor's thesis, exploring the hidden cosmology within Christianity, and to my master's thesis on the ethical implications of Heidegger's philosophy of time. Being and Time opens by invoking the ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides. Parmenides, the pre-Socratic, much admired by Socrates and Plato, proposed a distinction between the way of truth and the way of seeming as a profound framework for thinking about appearance, reality, and time. Parmenides calls us to abandon the illusions of sensory flux and change, the illusions of social opinion and belief, and to contemplate truth. What is the unchanging truth of being? He had a vision of the cosmos as an eternal unity, seen not through our senses, but through reason, inviting us to think rigorously about what truly is, beyond the distortions that our appearances, our beliefs, our mythologies create. Now, Heidegger takes up this challenge of what is truth by grounding truth in human existence. He felt that we encounter truth through care, our being in the world, our relations with other people, unfolding in time. Our temporal existence calls us to live authentically. We're finite and as finite beings, or to live inauthentically, where we can be lost in the everyday world of distraction and fantasy, what Parmenides called the way of seeming. So this tension between truth and appearance in Parmenides resonates strongly with Jung. His depth psychology offers a path from seeming to truth through the symbolic language of dreams, myths, and archetypes. These phenomena which appear to us, but which conceal deep unconscious truths. Like Heidegger, Jung sees modern consciousness as trapped in illusions. He used concepts like ego inflation, rationalism, collective conformity, and seeks to restore an authentic relationship to the self, to find an inner wholeness that transcends our appearances. Where Heidegger finds authenticity in our personal path towards death, Jung speaks more in terms of a confrontation with our shadow, the anima, and the numinous core of the psyche. And crucially, Jung broadens the scope of the way of truth to include non-Western traditions, including shamanic, Eastern, and indigenous cosmologies. These transmission traditions often maintain a living connection with what Western thought has lost, the sacred, the cyclical, the symbolic dimensions of being. Heidegger rejected the view of time as a successive series of nows, now, now, now. In Being and Time, he described existence stretched between our past, our future, and our present, and time not as a moment, but as the field of care, as the horizon of how we relate being with other people. And similarly, Jung's view of the psyche is grounded in cycles and patterns, mythic time that includes both memory and prophecy. He therefore rejects a fixation on the present moment as denying the archetypal depths of the unconscious. Living in the present moment, of course, is of immense value for reducing anxiety, deepening our perceptions, and practicing mindfulness. But to say only the present moment is real leads us to a sort of temporal dissociation where we haven't really got grounds to engage with history, with hope, with meaning. So, how do we see our life under the eye of eternity? It's an approach that Jung took from the renowned philosopher Baruch Spinoza to challenge the superficiality of popular thinking. Systematic thinking under the eye of eternity is a mode of understanding that seeks to comprehend the full interwoven structure of reality by seeing the past, the present, and the future as dynamically interconnected aspects of a whole. This phrase, under the eye of eternity, it's often known in its Latin form, subspecie aeternitatis. It originated in Spinoza and was widely adopted by thinkers such as Heidegger, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche to reflect a vantage point beyond our selfish perception, our ego, to imagine a cosmic and transtemporal awareness. So, systematic thinking under the eye of eternity sees every moment as bearing the imprint of the past and the seed of the future. We seek to understand how history shapes the present and how we can imagine future possibilities. Jung emphasised the importance of transcending our egocentric immediacy to instead situate our actions and our insights within the true self. So, perceiving the cosmos as a meaningful whole, as a living and evolving pattern of interconnectedness, integrates our existence with the past, the present, and the future. Authentic relation to the past grounds our lives in cultural memory and tradition. We can start to see the causes of trauma and value our heritage. Without the past, we're rootless. We repeat errors and we're disconnected from our origins. The authentic present seeks to situate our awareness and our choices attentively. And an authentic orientation to the future is the source of direction, hope, purpose, and meaning. Through imagining the future, we can overcome despair, irresponsibility, and the short-term thinking. So the eye of eternity illuminates the arc of time. For Spinoza, eternity calls us to see all things as elements of the whole, not from our partial perspective, but from the standpoint of God or nature. He used this term Deus sive natura to mean that God and nature are the same. Heidegger saw authentic being as, in terms of time, very much. We're thrown into history, we freely choose in the present, and we project into our future, or we can forfeit our lives to the inauthenticity of the mass culture. Jung saw eternity as the context of the individuation of the self. Individuation is a lifelong process in which we integrate our personal and our collective pasts. We unfold our present awareness and we prepare for our death. Archetypes are the contours of time for the unfolding of the self into durable patterns. These currents of perennial philosophy have essential ecological and ethical resonance, helping us to address the climate crisis and cultural fragmentation. Systematic thinking under the eye of eternity sees the present focus on culture, on technology, and politics in a framework that tries to restore accountability, connecting action to its consequences, reviving a sense of sacred continuity, linking us with our ancestors and our descendants in a common story across the generations. For our planetary climate, the eye of eternity is the voice of Gaia, expressing the stabilising processes that are needed to reverse our current trajectory towards systems collapse. Eternity is not an endless future in this sense, but rather a systems awareness. We see our personal, our social, our planetary systems as interlinked in time and space. We are threads in a living tapestry of time. Each action echoes from ancient causes. It ripples towards unborn futures in the care that arises when we see our being as a sacred continuity. So for Jung, time was not simply an arrow shooting forward. Rather, time is a circle, a spiral, a cycle, returning again and again to the same point, but each time at a higher level. He saw the recurrence of deep structures in myth, in dreams, in celestial patterns, expressing the archetypes of the collective unconscious as a shared psychic field that's inherent to the human mind. Jung's cyclic vision of time enabled him to see true spiritual life as a journey into the deepest rhythms of nature, of the psyche and of the cosmos. The collective unconscious is an inherited psychic structure shared by all humans, populated by archetypes, the universal patterns and figures like the hero, the mother, the trickster, the shadow. These archetypes recur in predictable forms across cultures and ages, in myths of the flood, the dying and rising God, other myths. Shared functions appeared in stories from Osiris, from Krishna, Dionysus, and Christ. Each reflects mythological archetypes: death and rebirth, the journey of the soul, the renewal of life, the messianic transformation of the world. These patterns recur because they are wired into the human psyche by natural evolution. Jung wrote, "We are like vintage years of wine. We each have the qualities of the year and of the season in which we are born." This helps to summarise his concept of synchronicity, the pervasive appearance of meaningful coincidences that connect celestial rhythms with our psyche as part of the same fabric. Synchronicity expresses the ancient Hermetic principle as above, so below. The macrocosm reflects the microcosm. The heavens, the earth, and the soul are all one. Time is like a river. The contours of the banks shape the flow of the water within it. Similarly, the ever-changing shape of the solar system, defined by the harmonic relationships between the sun, the planets, and the earth, provide contours for history, an eternal whole that provides a mysterious and sensitive context for synchronicity. For Jung, traditional religions were never meant to be literal explanations of the world. Rather, they are symbolic systems rich with archetypes, mediating between the conscious ego and the deeper self. Jung saw Jesus Christ not just as a historical figure, but as the great archetype of the self, as the image of the totality of the psyche, achieving wholeness. The passion of Christ mirrors the journey of individuation through suffering, the death of the ego, and the resurrection into a higher integration. The Book of Revelation, in Jung's view, is a cosmic drama projected onto the heavens. The beasts and angels are psychic contents. Its cycles of sevens reflect astrological and psychological rhythms. In Eastern traditions, such as Hinduism and Taoism, Jung found even more explicit alignment with cosmic cycles. The Yuga of Vedic tradition, the Tao, the I Ching, all express the view that spiritual life unfolds in harmony with the rhythms of nature. The goal of Jungian psychology is wholeness. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who we truly are by integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of our psyche. Individuation is a spiral journey. We don't return to the same place, but we revisit the same themes at deeper levels. Jung used the mandala as a symbol for this process, as a circular image representing the self, and discussed how mandalas appear spontaneously in dreams and myths and rituals, and seeing them as mirroring the structure of the cosmos, as balanced, as centered, and ordered. So, Jung enables us to ground meaning in natural cycles, but we live in a culture that has largely lost contact with time. Popular values chase the new, the fast, the efficient, the fashionable. But these superficial values are disconnected from natural rhythms, the day and night, the solstice and equinox of the seasons, the rhythms of birth and death. This disconnection from nature breeds anxiety, alienation, and ecological crisis. Jung suggests a synthesis of psychology, myth, and astronomy to show that to be spiritual is to be natural, not in the sense of denying the transcendent, but of seeing the transcendent within the cyclical. This vision shows that religion can evolve beyond dogma, integrating with science to recover wonder and sacred listening. As we rejoin the dance of the cosmos in a cosmology of participation rather than mere description, we can begin to heal the split between matter and spirit, between science and soul, between self and world. We can turn toward a greater wholeness, a re-enchantment of spirituality rooted in nature. This approach to spirituality as grounded in time underpinned Jung's deep respect for indigenous traditions, including shamanic traditions of healing and knowledge of hidden secrets. Jung recognised indigenous medicine as providing a psychotherapy where cultural initiation produces a sense of belonging and identity. Such a sense of meaningful participation in social and religious life is essential for mental health, but is largely lost in the anonymity and ambiguity of modern life. My friend Valerie Albrecht kindly shared with me an article by Rebecca Walker titled "Eternity Now: Aboriginal Concepts of Time." She analyses the clash between cyclic and linear concepts of time to set out perspectives that have strong resonance with Jung's approach. She explains that Western beliefs embed unseen assumptions which exclude the eternal from time. This separation between the eternal time is something that's not accepted in Indigenous traditions. Indigenous people, quite reasonably, see the alienation from nature within Western thought as unethical, especially in its assumptions of superiority. So the Western idea of the present is better than the past is not accepted in Indigenous cultures. And it's not only because of their experience of cultural genocide under the British conquest. So Walker critiques the modernist progress myth that the future must by definition be brighter, and this idea that only leaving the past behind can we get to a brighter future. There's so much in this mythology of technological progress that generates highly flawed theories of knowledge, ignoring how our progress is embedded with a broader trajectory of cultural collapse. This applies to the global problem of climate change as much as to the destruction of Indigenous cultures. The Aboriginal cosmology of the dreaming is as much here and now as in the past. It's sacred present, sacred past in the present. Walker relates a story of how one I'll give it a miss. One Warlpiri man commented that the Christian story of the cross saddened him very much, as not seeing it as a dramatic portrayal of a long past historical event, but more as expressing a contemporary punitive reality. So it's a question of how we see our stories. Are they describing things that happened long ago, or are they explaining our present reality? So the past is present in Indigenous culture. And so, for example, we can take this conflict in Australian politics where people say that current generations of Australians are not responsible for the events of the past. And for Aboriginal perspectives, that's a sort of blind denial. And we can look to the biblical claim that in the story of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20, that sins of the fathers continue to traumatise subsequent generations. And this is a trauma that appears both among the victors and the victims. Walker explains that refusal to see the eternal now of the dreaming fails to take into account the interconnectedness of people through their ancestors and descendants. It fails to see that from an Aboriginal perspective, white Australians are as bound to our ancestors as they are to theirs. The culture of white Australians' silence about Aboriginal genocide and linguicide is an example of how a flawed understanding of time and eternity has real psychological and social damage. We repress unwelcome facts into the unconscious, and they re-emerge in the mental health pandemics of loneliness, isolation, and depression. My own approach to Indigenous philosophy and psychology is strongly influenced by the epistemology of Don Juan Matus, who was a Yaqui sorcerer and warrior, and the main character in the books of Carlos Castaneda. In Tales of Power, Don Juan makes a rather confronting comment that eternity surrounds you. It's a brief statement with multiple profound meanings. Just in terms of the duration of the cosmos, the past and the future envelop the present. And equally, the presence of eternity has implications for the nature of our perception, our awareness, our being, beyond the limits of the ordinary mind. So eternity in Castaneda's usage is not just a time without end, but a dimension of reality that exists outside linear time. It's a timeless awareness that's always present, always accessible, though usually hidden by our habitual modes of perception, what he calls the tonal. So this epistemology of the tonal as what we can understand and the nagual as what is beyond our understanding, I find really quite profound and challenging to traditional Western thinking. So by saying eternity surrounds you, Don Juan is awakening Castaneda and us to the fact that this deeper reality is not distant from us, it's not theoretical, it's here and now, it's embedded in the world, but it's concealed by our fixation on ordinary interpretations. He says, the world is unfathomable, and so are we, and so is every being that exists in the world. This statement that everything is unfathomable expresses a key insight in Indigenous epistemology, and it relates directly to what Don Juan calls the nagual. As I mentioned, the nagual is highly mysterious. It refers to the unknown, the unstructured, the infinite complexity of being. In this view, eternity is the field of awareness that we access by breaking the boundaries of our organised familiar self and world, known as the tonal. Eternity is not a future state, but a different mode of being. To see that eternity surrounds you is to perceive the world energetically, beyond the filtering structures that we've erected in language, in habit, in identity. Observing eternity is linked to what Don Juan calls stopping the world. It's a moment when our internal dialogue ceases and direct perception of reality becomes possible. It's a shamanic vision of eternity that lives with an awareness of death at all times in order to develop what this tradition calls an impeccable ethic, fully present, disciplined, unattached. In doing so, they live as if eternity surrounds them. And the shamanic goal is to learn to cross into eternity consciously, rather than being swept into eternity unconsciously at death. In Tales of Power, this phrase, eternity surrounds you, means that a timeless realm of direct perception, of pure awareness, of ultimate reality is always present, but we are blind to it because of the constructs of the tonal. The path of the warrior is to dismantle these constructs through discipline, through silence, through unbending intent. So eternity is not just around us, but within us. An equivalent within Christianity can be seen in the comment by Jesus Christ that the kingdom of God is among you. The Greek term among, entos, means both among and within. And so we see that the kingdom of God is among us, in the room, and within us, in each of our hearts. Jesus here collapses the eschatological horizon. So our traditions see the kingdom of God as a future state and as something to wait for in the distant future, whereas this idea that the kingdom of God is among and within us means the kingdom is already here, but it's hidden from ordinary perception. As Jesus says elsewhere, having eyes you do not see. Eternity is not out there or in the afterlife, it's immanent, always surrounding, always accessible, but hidden by the tonal, that is our ordered conscious self and worldview. The nagual, the unknown, is the field of eternity. To become a person of knowledge is to step outside linear time and habitual perception into timeless awareness. This echoes mystical traditions where the eternal is not a duration but a state of being, a direct and luminous presence beneath ordinary perception. Jung, especially in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and also in his book Psychology and Alchemy, frequently engages with this timeless nature of the psyche, where archetypes exist outside time, yet are manifest within time. He says, as I quoted already, we are not of today or of yesterday, we are of an immense age. Echoing Castaneda's idea that eternity isn't afterlife, but a depth dimension of the present, rooted in the collective unconscious, the psychic field that connects past, present, and future. Dreams, visions, synchronicities are eruptions of eternity into time. When these occur, we feel surrounded by eternity. We feel this numinous presence that reveals the moment as part of something larger and deeper. In his book, Aeon, Jung associates the self with the pleroma. It's a Greek word that means the fullness of being, beyond any oppositions, beyond time, aligning with the unchanging presence of eternity. The self is therefore the eternal within us. It's the centre that orients our consciousness towards wholeness. Jung's vision, eternity means eternity surrounds us through the unconscious, especially in archetypal experience. The psyche is not bound by clock time, but lives cyclically, ritually, symbolically. When our conscious ego yields to our true self, we enter the field of eternal meaning. I've equally found this connection between indigenous ontology of the Nagual and the ideas of Martin Heidegger quite illuminating and helpful. Heidegger's focus on being as a reality that is prior to and beyond time, but also disclosed in time, means being gathers all times into a single presence. In this view, eternity surrounds us because we're always already in being. We dwell in being like a fish in water, but we usually fail to notice it, except when we learn to dwell contemplatively and attentively. Like Don Juan's warrior who lives in the shadow of death, Heidegger's existential philosophy becomes authentic by confronting death and thus accessing the fullness of time. So Heidegger, like Castaneda, implies that eternity is not a future state, but the ground of our being, always present, always surrounding us, if only we can awaken to it. When Castaneda is told that eternity surrounds you, it's a call to wake up, to stop identifying with the fleeting contents of the tonal of everyday assumptions, and to realise that we are already immersed in the eternal. The breakthrough from linear time into a deeper presence appears in Castaneda as the Nagual, in Jung as the eternal present as the self and the archetypal unconscious, and for Heidegger as being, the unchanging presence disclosed through time. These ideas all cohere with the vision I mentioned from Parmenides of the One, encompassing all of time to offer a radical metaphysical anchor. Only the eternal is real. The Christian concept of Christ as the Logos, the word, reason and meaning, also provides quite a profound theological framework for understanding the interconnectedness of past, present and future in a context of divine wholeness. Viewed as the Logos, time is not a linear sequence of unrelated moments, but a unified field in which meaning unfolds, integrating memory, presence, destiny. The Gospels tell us the Logos pre-exists time and yet enters into history in the incarnation. So Christ is not merely a temporal figure, he's the eternal made manifest in the flow of history, anchoring the timeless in time, the presence of eternity in the world. This collapses the division between past, present and future. Time becomes structured Christologically. Creation, redemption and fulfillment. The Logos gathers together the past, the ancestral fall from grace, the present, the redemptive suffering of Christ, and the future resurrection and glorification into a single coherent narrative, with Christ as the axis of the world, the still point in a turning world, uniting the fragmented dimensions of human time. Christ suspends time, creating a sacred time where all times converge. And Christ, as the archetype of the self for Jung, integrates our past traumas, our present tensions, our future potential. The Logos is the pattern of wholeness unfolding. Jung's spiritual sense of time integrates psychological archetypes, astronomical cycles, and theological metaphysics into a unified symbolic framework, revealing Christ as the archetype of wholeness within the psyche and as the cosmic centre around which the ages revolve. As Logos, Christ is not merely a historical person, but the inner image of order, meaning and unity, projected outward in myth and doctrine. This archetype integrates the individual soul into a cosmic pattern, just as the self mediates between the ego and the collective unconscious. Jung, in his book Aeon, discussed the terrestrial cosmology of the precession of the equinox in terms of Christ as the pivot of the ages, placing this Logos theology into a lost ancient cosmology. Precession of the equinox is an orbital cycle that our planet has a wobble of its axis that takes about 26,000 years, which means that the background stars at the equinox and the solstice are constantly changing. And so, for example, we're now at the end of the astrological age of Pisces and the dawn of the age of Aquarius, which means it's a physical process that the equinox over the next 2,000 years will move through the constellation of Aquarius, so moving the ages in reverse order. So each age takes 2,148 years. And for Jung, it corresponds to a symbolic dispensation in history, a great shift in the collective unconscious that activates new meanings, reshaping religion, society, and consciousness. So the ages over history over the last 6,000 years, Taurus, Aries, and Pisces, and the coming 2,000 years of Aquarius, are not just arbitrary, but for Jung are expressions of archetypal epochs, psychological as well as historical. The age of Aries was symbolised by Moses and the ram, succeeded by the age of Pisces marked by the fish. And I've done a lot of study of this. I looked into the astronomy of it, and it actually occurred on the 15th of September in 21 AD, just because there's a line of stars that was crossed by the equinox on that date. And so it was ancient astronomers and seers were able to predict for centuries beforehand when this would happen just by astronomy without anything supernatural. And so Christ as the Logos is identified with and appears at this turning point in history, the cusp between the age of Aries and the age of Pisces, symbolising the cosmic axis. And the axis of the earth gives rise to this precession movement, and equally the Logos is an ontological axis that gives rise to a meaningful unfolding of history and psyche that's presented in concealed form in the Bible as based on the classical philosophy as above, so below, which is expressed in the Bible in the Lord's Prayer, on earth as in heaven. And this axis gives time its direction and meaning, a spiral towards individuation. So Jung is sometimes called the father of the age of Aquarius, and he wrote that this coming age of Aquarius will constellate new tensions as we see the rise of technology and collective ideology. He discussed the return of the shadow, the elements of our soul and psyche that have been repressed by Christianity, and a new image of wholeness that will integrate masculine and feminine, the rational and the intuitive. The second coming of Jesus Christ is not a supernatural event, but a psychological and symbolic event of the logos, the self, returning in a new form, awakening consciousness at a deeper level. A logos-centered cosmology of time can see that just as the stars rotate around the celestial pole, so the ages revolve around the logos, with Christ the axis of being, in whom time finds its meaning and the soul its form. Aligning with the logos, the cosmos and our consciousness are integrated into an orderly pattern. The procession has been veiled in myth and symbol, and for Jung it becomes a sacred calendar, revealing the unfolding of divine archetypes through time. Jung has an empirical spirituality, grounded in observation of the cosmos and the world. He deliberately rejects supernatural metaphysics in order to see the idea of Christ as the Logos in terms of processional time, and calling us to shift our interpretive framework to understand eternity in this way as enfolding our situation in a way that we can see if we learn to look. So we move from viewing the symbolic language in the Bible as external supernatural realities to understanding them as psychological expressions, cosmological expressions of our inner experience, grounded in archetypes and myths and the structure of the psyche. Jung's approach allows us to preserve the meaning and the transformational power of religious ideas like the Logos, without depending on belief in a literal metaphysical Christ or divine intervention. Instead, these symbols become empirically accessible manifestations of the collective unconscious, arising in dreams, visions, cultural myths, and most pointedly in astronomical observation. Jung treated God, Christ, angels and demons not as supernatural beings, but as archetypal patterns arising from the deep structures of the psyche. He didn't ask, is God real in a metaphysical sense, but rather, how does our image of God affect the soul? This means that spiritual truths are real in their effects on us, even if not objectively real in the traditional metaphysical sense. Symbols form bridges between our psyche and the cosmos, with the psyche mirroring the cosmos. What appears in the heavens appears in the soul. Myth, astrology, religious imagery are not superstitions to be discarded, but symbolic systems that help to integrate the unconscious with conscious life. The Logos in this context is a psychological orientation principle, the axis around which we create meaning. The Logos is therefore not a supernatural agent, but rather the archetype of wholeness and order, fulfilling Jung's requirement for empirical grounding. Christ is the symbolic image of the self and the unifying principle of consciousness and unconsciousness. In this view, Christ is not out there performing miracles or returning from heaven. Rather, the Christ symbol emerges within the psyche as a response to the need for integration in the face of fragmentation, both personally and culturally. Procession is a symbolic mirror of the psyche. The procession of the equinox is a cosmic myth It's not a cause of psychic change, but rather a mirror of the deep shifts in collective consciousness, with each age reflecting a dominant archetypal configuration. So for Jung, he discussed Aries as the age of Aries for the 2,000 years before Christ, as reflected in the patriarchal religions of that time, and then the age of Pisces seen in terms of faith and compassion and suffering embodied in Christ, and then the age of Aquarius seen in terms of knowledge, technology, collective transformation, calling forth a new synthesis of the rational and the intuitive. The movement of the heavens becomes a symbolic calendar of the unfolding of archetypes. It's not a causal mechanism, but rather a synchronistic framework. And Jung remained cautiously open to astrology in these sort of terms. The process of individuation, becoming one's whole self, is mirrored in the cosmic motion of the precession cycle. The Logos is the symbol of inner integration, our psychic North Star. Christ as Logos functions as the mythic centre of this individuation journey. It's not a matter of supernatural intervention, but rather that the Christ archetype expresses the psychic ideal of totality. Processional time doesn't dictate our fate, but it reveals the synchronistic shifts in our collective psychic life. Christ, as the axis of our psychological time, is the centre around which the self integrates past, present and future into wholeness. This framework affirms the spiritual truths of religion while critiquing its metaphysical literalism and placing the roots of faith not in belief but in experience. Thank you.
Wow, Robbie, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. A little bit of housekeeping here in a minute, but I wanted to say the wholeness of what Jung brought to the world, you've been able to bring out in such depth tonight, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions after we have supper. Yes, we'll have a good discussion. So please keep your questions. We'll have a break now for supper and come back, and it's so good to see you all here. But, you know, just think about the wholeness of life, body, mind, spirit, Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbie. To ask Robbie questions, to make discussions, to talk about our impressions of what he was talking about and our own ideas, and to exchange all of that. And before I do, and so I don't forget, we have monthly meetings. The first Friday of every month we come here. And we love to see new faces, and it's wonderful to see you here again this week, this month, as some of you were last month. So in August we've got Deborah Bryan, Time and Trauma, the Wisdom of Andy and Shane. This is very interesting. In September we've got Eve Warren, A Dream and a Teacher. October may change to Remembering Lost Wife, so that might be different. October is Shauna. Sorry, Shauna. Beg your pardon, Shauna. Shauna's consciousness and the phenomenology of psychosis, which is also another existential look at things. I think they'll be wonderful. Phenomenology is existential. November's the one that might change because we might be honouring Ross White that month. We'll see where we go with that. And then, of course, December's the Christmas party. And hopefully, if you all come along, by the time we get to December, we'll all have a wonderful celebration. Now, Robbie, I was thinking about all those existential guys, and I do agree with your concept that Christianity, that Christ is the centre of the circle. Everything's cyclical. So I'm going to kick off this discussion by asking you, what do you think about the cyclical nature life. The seasons, our cells and our bodies, our mind, our spirits, and we're all three in one, aren't we?
It's so the cyclical nature of time is really quite fundamental. When we look at deep history, we can see, for example, the history of the ice ages. So over the last million years, the ice ages have a 100,000-year sawtooth pattern, and that's driven by three orbital patterns. That is, that the orbit of the Earth changes from round to oval every 100,000 years, and the tilt of the Earth varies between 21 and 24 degrees every 41,000 years, and the equinox precesses every 20, it's not 26,000 for the climate cycle, it's 21,000. But anyway, so we've got this fundamental pattern that has provided the context of our evolution. And I think one of the issues that this raises is that our life is far more fragile and sensitive than we commonly realise. And this in particular is why climate change is such an immense danger, because we need to understand the cyclic patterns of life. And in pre-modern times, agriculture was driven very much by the seasons. And so much of our modern technology has lost that cyclic feeling of the seasons. So I've done a lot of study of this, and in some other papers exploring the connections between different ways of thinking. So there's the Indian Vedic Yuga cycle, which actually has a really close integration with that climate cycle. And so placing Christianity within that context of cyclical theories of time, to me, has just generates some very profound insights. But then we have this linear model that's become dominant in our world, like to see eternity as meaning a personal afterlife in heaven or hell. It just makes no sense in terms of reality. But the sort of eternity concepts that Jung was talking about as presence within time reflects that sort of cyclic awareness. Shauna. Shauna's next. Yeah, I'll take questions from people, if that's all right. So Shauna next.
All of what you said is wonderful, and I really they were very deep insights outside of how we normally experience. What I was going to say, they're from the continental tradition, and in the analytic tradition, MacKillop, who was one of the first analytic philosophers, talks about the A series and the B series. So the B series is like a block universe where the past, present, and future are all exist at the same time, and the A series is like an arrow of time where only the moment exists, and time moves in an arrow. And quantum mechanics supports the block universe, whereas I think general relativity supports the block universe, and quantum mechanics supports the arrow universe. And so these ways of looking at time aren't as deep and profound as the ones you're talking about. You know, when you're talking about if we're present, then we're in eternity. Like they're very deep insights into the phenomenology of how we could learn to be, to have a more direct experience of reality. But I'd just say that within the analytic tradition of philosophy and leaning on science, there's this other way of viewing time, you know, which is this block universe
all this arrow, and that's from MacKillop, who was, I think MacKillop was the teacher of Russell. Russell was the teacher of Wittgenstein, and so Russell and Moore. So that was in the early 1900s, Cambridge or something, and they were at the beginning of the analytic tradition. So that's kind of in the Anglo-American tradition. That's how time has been understood, and so it's just an interesting contrast. Like everything in the analytic tradition, it leans on science a lot, and it doesn't seem to have the profundity of this continental approach. But it also does kind of have this, it seems really valid in its own way, in that it does kind of lean, as I said, on science.
Sure. I think there's a very important contrast that you're alluding to here, which I mentioned in passing, but it's this idea of whether our cosmology is about how we describe the universe or about how we connect to the universe. And the analytic tradition, because of its close connections to modern science, just by taking modern science as the assumed framework of meaning, it essentially rejects the continental, as you put it, idea that how we connect to the cosmos is an important philosophical question. And that's my perception. So there's this descriptive model. So astronomy is just absolutely wonderful in its description of the universe. Like, it's just so astounding, all of these new discoveries that are coming out every day within astronomy. But the field of astronomy is totally unwilling to open up the question of how do we connect to the universe. Like the sort of participatory cosmology, like saying, what does it mean to say that we are part of the universe? That's such a mysterious question that it's out of scope for astronomy. And so these sorts of cyclical models of the seasons, of the stars, are part of the problem, of course, is the disrepute that astrology has, and the fact that so much astrology is very much folk traditions that are not empirically grounded. And so that's led to just a general assumption that the sort of language that Jung is using about astrological ages is meaningless. But I disagree with that critique, because there's this whole sense that in the Bible itself, that sort of cyclic participatory cosmology was a really important part of the ancient world. But then with the emergence of the church, that approach was sidelined. And so there's this whole problem of how a linear form of thinking is very practical, but it doesn't really engage with deep questions of meaning and purpose. I hope that's of some help. I don't want to get into the issues of what quantum mechanics and general relativity have to say.
I wasn't pushing back on your presentation at all. And as I said, I think those sort of insights into time they are insights.
Thanks. Okay. Up the back.
Being the Jung Society, I better introduce green material.
Thank you.
About 10 years ago, I dreamt that mobile phones were controlling the world. Everyone had a mobile phone, and there was a central administrative computer. Everyone was given jobs on their mobile phone, which they had to upload. Where I'm leading to is that human beings are very good at creating their own reality, irrespective of any wider reality. And the reality we're hurtling into is one of mobile phones, artificial intelligence, autocratic governments, loss of personal control, loss of individuality, and loss of anything but materialism and transactionalism. In this sort of world that we're hurtling into rapidly, despite any philosophical concerns, does that mean the loss of the old archetypes? Does that mean a total disconnect with the past? There's the question.
Thank you very much. Now, for the recording, I'll just repeat my notes that you had a dream of a future in which mobile phones controlled the world, and it actually made me think of the Matrix movies, and which really quite prophetic. And through a central administrative computer allocating jobs and enabling us to create our own reality, but hurtling into an AI world of mobile phone autocracy with the loss of personal control, loss of individuality, and a materialist transactionism in which the old archetypes are lost. And it's a really wonderful point. And I have to admit that I used ChatGPT quite extensively for writing my talk. People who are familiar with that sort of language might be able to tell a bit, but it's my work. But I find that the extra 40 points of IQ and information that I get from running things through artificial intelligence is actually really constructive, and so I'm actually more positive. But the way I look at the challenge that you're describing is to agree that we do seem to have a very bleak situation in our world. And I would add the problem of climate change, which is really looming as quite a significant collapse problem for our world. And but I believe it's something that can be reversed, but with great challenge. Now, as far as the role of archetypal thinking, one way that I've explored this is through the biblical language of the apocalypse. And so the Bible tells the story of the four horsemen: famine, plague, death and war. And we can see that those four horsemen are stalking the world today, and so just generating this great risk of collapse. And yet the Bible proposes that it will be possible to confront those forces of collapse and defeat them. And so it's possible to read the Bible as providing inspiration for a very realistic confrontation. Now, the Bible presents it in the apocalypse as a war in heaven between Michael and Satan. So the archangel up against the devil. And so we can see the devil as all of the forces that are leading towards, what did you say, loss of individuality and autocracy and materialist transactionism, but equally the indifference to climate change, to biodiversity. And we can see, because one of my favourite lines in the Bible, Revelation 11:18, it says that the wrath of God is against those who destroy the earth. And that takes up quite a different perspective on the meaning of God from much of the conventional, certainly the fundamentalist tradition that's, like I see fundamentalism as really quite satanic, unfortunately. And because this sense from Jung that we need a natural cosmology and we need to integrate religion with nature is I think, fundamental to the salvation of the earth. And all of these religious concepts, salvation, heaven, grace, they can be reinterpreted in a non-supernatural way that generates a form of realism that can, I suppose, seek to bring the forces of good together to confront the forces of evil. And that's the sort of image that the Bible imagines as both I would call it the dawn of the age of Aquarius, as the second coming of Jesus Christ. So taking all of this supernatural language and reinterpreting it through a completely scientific lens seems to me to be essential to address the big problems that you described.
Robert, can I just say that war between heaven and earth?
Between Michael and Satan, war in heaven.
Could that be related to the ego, human ego mind, super mind, or the ego mind that's searching for itself?
Of course, and this,
the unconscious mind
yeah,
connected to the universal idea.
And this is where Jung's theories are so valuable, like critiquing the shallowness of our ego consciousness and its imagination that identifies the ego with the self. Take the back there.
Thanks for that, for the talk. Probably everybody will add that it highlights really how much I have. So from that place, I'm interested in what's said about the sacred and whether disruption is sacred, whether that is also something to be integrated into our understanding.
Thank you. Can disruption be sacred? Now, yes, although really complex adaptive systems are slowly built up and rapidly destroyed. And that creative destruction of complex systems is a source of much suffering. So we do wish that we can maintain continuity. And so we have this debate emerging in the context of doomism. That is the idea that we are on the brink of world collapse, that humanity is a plague upon the planet, that we deserve to go extinct. So there are people who think that way, and so who see collapse as inevitable and good. Now, I don't share that view. I think maintaining continuity with the complexity of civilization is something that's inherently good, and that we should aim to minimise the disruptive collapse that is looming in terms of how do we sustain 8 billion humans on this planet with such in such a fragile and sensitive context where our political leaders are quite crazy and it's so difficult to get any rationality into the public sphere. So it's I would not describe disruption itself as sacred, because I would prefer to say that we should try to minimise upheaval. But then, if there are people who are actively disrupting ecosystems, then they need to be disrupted in order to be on the side of the ecosystems to prevent the disruption that's occurring. So it's an ambiguous question. Thank you.
My question is, I think, free will
Please speak up.
If maintain recognize and what does Jung say free will. Is our future.
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and I placed it in my talk in the context of time as a river, where for example, the structure of the solar system. Like I love astrology, and just seeing the big movements of the planets, the outer planets, especially with their slow cycles. We've just got Saturn and Neptune in conjunction at the equinox, and the whole astrological community, who are, of course, completely invisible to the rest of the world, are talking about this as a significant event. The movement of Pluto into Aquarius a couple of years ago, and Uranus into Gemini next week. These are, big structural changes. It's like the contours of the river, but the planets incline, but they don't compel. So what that means is that the complexity of human existence means that we must view ourselves as free, that we have free will, and that we have agency, we have choice about making decisions, and we can't surrender to a sort of fatalist attitude that says everything is destined, because it's like we don't know to what extent our own intervention to change the world is part of that destiny. So we have to live as though we are free. Well, maybe God knows. But we can't even be sure that God knows, because, God knows what's happening with the movements of the planets. They're very orderly, but God doesn't necessarily know what decisions any of us are going to make. We may be quite free. Like, it may be, Shauna mentioned quantum mechanics, which suggests a sort of indeterminacy in the basis of physics, which could mean that even God doesn't know the future. I'm actually not sure. I haven't come across Jung discussing freedom as a theme, but my feeling is that he's on the side of freedom.
I agree, because otherwise,
freedom of the will. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Shauna?
I say I should be just because I've gone through a philosophy degree, and I kind of. But from my thoughts on it, it seems that the sort of freedom you're talking about is limited. Depending upon aspects of our upbringing and aspects of our actual abilities, and there's a whole lot of reasons that we're constrained with our freedom. We don't have
absolutely.
Unlimited.
We have contours which are in our life, which are our circumstances and the boundaries of our possibility. But I suppose my moral sense is that we are more free than we often realise, and that people need to take the opportunities to push the boundaries of determinism. Like, there was the great story from in the 18th century, that in the time of Napoleon, Laplace, who said, if I knew the position and momentum of every particle in the universe, then I could predict the future until the end of time. And that's really quite nonsensical. But it's a thought experiment that people like to discuss. So there's this debate between free will and determinism. Now, you mentioned predestination, which is the idea that God knows if we're going to go to heaven or not, from Calvin. And that seems to undermine freedom. So there's been a lot of debate within Christian theology about, but equally, Christianity has been very strong on, for example, rejecting astrology because of the deterministic fatalism that is seen in astrology. So, for example, Augustine took that view that astrology had to be rejected. But I would say that, there's so much in our world that determines our boundaries of possibility that looking at the patterns of the cosmos is, if that can be helpful, then it's of great value.
It really reminded me of Dante and his experience of time throughout the three realms, because in hell, time is endless and eternity is endless, but it's always experience. Whereas then you get to purgatory and you have that beginning and end. And then when you're in paradise, you have eternity, but it's experienced differently time-wise, because it's that instant of pure joy, your experience without that linearity to it. So I was just wondering, because when you think about, you were talking about the more that you can bring that wholeness in. So do you think it's experiential in terms of how conscious you are of the experience? Yeah.
Well, so I read The Divine Comedy by Dante, and fascinating book with Mount Purgatory as a giant mountain in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, somewhere near Tahiti, written in about 1200 before the Portuguese had sailed south of the equator. So, and hell as an icy realm with Satan in water at the very centre of the earth. So fascinating cosmology of a sort of triple-decker universe of heaven above and earth and hell below. That I feel that whole traditional cosmology is quite corrupted, because I would prefer to say that heaven is our imagination of what the world could become, and hell is the path, the risky path of what could happen to the world. So they are dystopic and utopic futures of human life, rather than places that we go to after death. Yeah. So does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. All right. Yep. Well, there's time for a couple more if anybody, or we can have an early mic. Sure.
I mean, how his experience life.
Yeah. Well,
I see hell as a state of mind.
Jesus says that the road to hell is wide and easy, while the road to heaven is narrow and difficult. And so there's this sense that if we cultivate a moral life, then we can transform our planet to fix it up. And that's essentially the millennial vision in the Bible. That is 6,000 years of decline, of fall, followed by 1,000 years of repair. And
then if something bad happens, like it must be moral. It's kind of a crazy idea that the circumstances of your life reflect your ethical behaviour.
No, I don't agree with that. Like, I think that that's a misinterpretation. Like, I know people say that, like, for example, hurricanes are caused by homosexuality, but and which is quite a nonsensical thing. That goes back to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That, you know, Sodom was hit by meteorites because of homosexuality, and which is quite nonsensical. But the way I would prefer to frame it is to say we do have agency and choice in terms of, do we wish to make the world a better place or allow it to slide into collapse? And that it's the slide into collapse and destruction and conflict that is aligns with the biblical concept of hell. Now, there's another important story about heaven and hell, which is Dives and Lazarus. And I would mention that, in my view, Lazarus is Osiris, one and the same. And that's an interesting, controversial question. But the Lazarus is the poor man who goes to heaven, and Dives is the rich man who goes to hell. And so there's this whole critique of the selfish greed of wealth that is bringing the destruction of the earth, and that it's the life of the poor in spirit, the blessings that Jesus expressed in the Beatitudes and the Last Judgment, present a fairly clear path to repair the earth and repair society, and present a gradual trajectory to reverse the path towards destruction.
You know, time itself is a huge question mark around concept. So time is timeless, right? So we're privileged in this country to have 5,000 years of population here. It's in timeless, even today. You know, like we look at, you can see from an aerial view the rivers of Australia, and there's the rainbow stuff, which relates to the myth of the rainbow stuff. You know, the whales coming back from the lower southern hemisphere coming through, and the Aborigines had a deal with the whales. We'll have one, thank you, and did a dance on the shore. We wouldn't do that, but that's timeless. That's something that we haven't learned from our Indigenous people. We're too tied up with our own dystopian ideas. Too black and white. I think time is something that lasts and goes on in a circle. And I just wanted to just put that thought out there.
It's really complicated. There's this sense that the dreaming is timeless, that it's an eternal now. And as I mentioned in my talk, there is so much in Indigenous culture that is of great value, which we are gradually learning after the centuries of disdain and racism that's been the pattern in Australia. And so respecting Aboriginal culture and people is something that I think is just really central to, like Jesus, the key teaching that Jesus says about the second coming is that what will happen in the second coming is that the least of the world will be treated as though they are Jesus Christ. And so that's in Matthew 25. And so it's this sense of respect for the inherent dignity of all creation that is, and that extends beyond humanity to extent respect for animals and plants and soil, respect for nature. And so Pope Francis, his encyclical Laudato Si, called for an integral ecology where we respect humanity and nature, and that's quite a big shift in Christian theology that has a history of quite strong disrespect both for nature and for other cultures. And so so I think that, but at the same time, we just have to be realistic. Like the fact is that Australia now feeds 60 million people, and before British conquest, it fed 1 million. And so there's all of these sorts of questions of realism about Aboriginal culture, and the need for as I commented, instrumental thinking is just absolutely essential. We just need to be scientific, but at the same time place science within this more mystical cosmology of Gaia. Shauna?
It's a bit off track. It's to do with the work I'm interested in, but it seems that to access reality differently and to experience time differently is a shift in consciousness. We know that things like meditation or drug use or whatever can shift consciousness. And when, for example, someone who uses LSD may experience time standing still, but it seems that it's not just time. Time is one aspect of these different things that change when we, like, the normal waking state that we're in now is different to being under light anesthetic, which is different to being on LSD, which is different to being drunk or whatever. And it seems like there are aspects that change you from those different states, and then things like level of arousal or the quality of contents. Like if you're on LSD, things are sharper or maybe more colourful, or and how your attention is spread and how you control it and how you experience the sense of self, the experience of time, how these are there are different aspects that can change, which can change you from one of those states of consciousness to another. And it seems our Western, the way we access reality, we're quite stuck in some kind of way that perhaps, I don't know, I'm not going to speak with any authority at all about Indigenous stuff, I don't know, but I spoke to one woman who lived in Darwin. She said, it was kind of like the Indigenous people she knew was like treading in it, and when she would become unwell, which was psychotic, she had an idea of they're treading in two worlds, and you can tread in this other world, and she would thought she got kind of an insight into that when she would be unwell, and the unwellness was more of an interconnectedness, or that's my term for it, but there's this sense of interconnection, or perhaps the idea of a mystical example of oneness, and it doesn't have to be that experience of being present in the moment, mindful, present, with less of a barrier between you and reality. It seems we have that barrier between us because of how our normal consciousness, I don't exactly, and obviously I don't know, but I don't know what it is about our consciousness means that we're missing out on.
One thing is, I think that we regard the earth as dead, where Indigenous cultures very much view the earth as alive.
But it's not that we're born into this culture. It's not a rational choice to view nature as dead. We're born without that connection.
Yes.
The Aboriginals are.
Well, no, there's a lot of trauma in those many communities.
About the ones that are still out there. There's a lot of them.
Well, look, we'll just take one more question.
Just one more comment on that. I think in the Indigenous literature that's coming through, the Indigenous scholarship in this area, there's everywhere seems to be the term that's coming through. Is it everywhere?
Yes.
Everything at once. There's a book that's come out through UNSW Press, with Anna Gatz,
Right.
is the editor. So yeah, I just encourage, as a way of bridging and reading the Indigenous culture that's coming out. It really is good.
Yeah, and like that's what I was alluding to with my talk of epistemology and ontology within Indigenous philosophies, as this sort of concept of every one is reflects a theory of knowledge that's really very different from our dominant assumptions in Western thought, like the idea of all times being in simultaneous existence is just is not accepted in our mainstream society, and yet it's something that that presents this sort of approach to eternity that has got quite a strong foundation in some of the Western philosophy, like Jung, that I was discussing, but much more so in as a sort of basic assumption within Indigenous culture.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for everything. And I think it's getting on to nearly 5 to 10 now, so it's time we all went home. But Robbie, we'd like to present you with this certificate of appreciation, and thank you very much for a very interesting evening and great discussion. So please, those who would like to join, Karen's going to be sitting over there at that table, and she'll join you up right now. And then you can take home one of those newsletters if you like, and we'd love to see you all again next month. And thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, Robbie, very much.